Good evening and welcome to NTD News. I'm Evelyn Lee. Here are today's top stories. The Texas governor is calling for Democratic lawmakers who fled the state to be arrested. The Texas Democrats are still in Washington, D.C., and they are calling on Congress to pass the S-1 election reform bill. As thousands of Cubans fight for freedom in their homeland, some are making their way to the land of the free. We hear from Cuban asylum seekers crossing into the U.S. They call communism the biggest plague in the universe. The FBI asks family members to report on each other if they see signs of violent extremism. Senators and others call the report outrageous and something they'd see in communist China. And federal agencies are sending a new warning to companies still doing business in China's Xinjiang region. They're warning about forced labor and human rights abuses in the region. Texas Democratic lawmakers who fled the state on Monday are in Washington, D.C. in an attempt to block Texas's voting bills. Governor Greg Abbott is now calling for their arrest. NTD's Jason Perry spoke with constitutional expert Rick Green to find out the details.
The Democratic lawmakers who fled Texas are still in Washington, D.C. Some of them believe that Texas's voting bills are in retaliation to the 2020 presidential election.
These Republicans in this legislature may have changed the Messiah, Jesus, to Trump, but I haven't. And I'm going to make sure that everything that I can do, that my constituents' right would not be stripped from them because of what they believe in is a lie. Trump lost the election. Yes, he did. And they need to tell the people of this country the truth.
Others are calling on Congress to take bold action to stop the Texas bills.
We can't stay here indefinitely to run out the clock, to stop Republican anti-voter bills. That's why we need Congress to act now and pass the For the People Act.
A former Texas lawmaker and America's constitutional coach, Rick Green, says the Texas voting bills are not meant to restrict voting rights.
We're trying to stop in Texas, which is chaos in the elections. We don't want election officials to be able to change the rules at the last minute to favor one side over the other. We don't want people to be able to go in and vote without guaranteeing who they are. And we want to make sure that the absentee ballot process is not manipulated, that it's only used for those few people that absolutely cannot show up and vote at the polls.
But the Texas Democrats left the state so the election reform bills could not be voted on. U.S. Senator John Cornyn described the move as taking your ball and going home in the middle of the game.
They got on two chartered jets, maskless, with at least one case of light beer, and hopped on the jets to come to Washington, D.C.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott told KVUE that as soon as they come back to Texas, they will be arrested and cabined inside the Texas Capitol until they get their job done. Green explained how arresting the lawmakers would work.
Texans feel so strongly about this, we put it in the Constitution that we could force these legislators to get back to work. And so then in the House rules, they have a mechanism in what's known as Rule 5, Section 8, where they can literally tell the sergeant at arms, go arrest these members, drag them into the chamber, lock the door, and let's get the work of Texas done.
And on Tuesday, the Texas House did just that in a 76-4 vote and authorized arrest warrants for the Democratic lawmakers who are absent without excuse. On the same day, President Biden expressed his disapproval of the new voting bills being passed in red states.
This year alone, 17 states have enacted, not just proposed, but enacted 28 new laws to make it harder for Americans to vote.
Many Republicans believe the new laws are to improve voting integrity, while Democrats believe they are suppressing voter rights. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis wants Floridian companies to provide internet to residents in Cuba. This comes as a communist Cuban regime shuts down internet services amid mass civilian uprising. NTD's Grace Coulter has the details.
All of you have mentioned here today.
Governor Ron DeSantis held a roundtable with Republican lawmakers and members of the Cuban exile community in Miami Tuesday. The The Florida governor pitched an idea to help the Cuban people as they enter their third day of uprising.
What does the regime do when you start to see these images? They shut down the internet. They don't want the truth to be out. They don't want people to be able to communicate. And so one of the things I think we should be able to do with our private companies or with the United States is to provide some of that internet service via satellite. We have companies on the Space Coast that launch these things.
He didn't provide details on how to turn on remote hotspots, but added he would make calls on what the options are to make it happen. DeSantis said everyone present agreed that the Cubans are not complaining about a lack of vaccine or for some tangential issue. He said they're revolting against a corrupt communist dictatorship that has ruled the island with an iron fist for over 60 years. And dozens of demonstrators shut down a section of highway in Miami-Dade County Tuesday afternoon to show solidarity with Cubans fighting for freedom. The scene was captured in this video. According to local news reports, another group of demonstrators near the area were chanting a call to President Biden to put an end to communism. As of 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time, traffic was still at a standstill in the northbound lanes. Local authorities asked drivers to avoid the expressway and use the Florida Turnpike instead. Grace Coulter, NTD News.
And we hear from some Cuban asylum seekers who are fleeing to the U.S. One of the migrants says he would have been killed if he stayed on the island and calls communism the biggest plague in the universe. NTD's Grace Coulter with more.
While thousands of Cubans are fighting for freedom at home, some are making their way to the United States to find freedom. Before the recent uprising began, Epoch Times reporter Charlotte Cuthbertson spoke to this group of Cubans who had just crossed the U.S.-Mexico border. They shared their stories about why they fled their home country and described what life was like living under Cuba's communist regime.
Where communism exists, there is no freedom. Communism is the biggest plague in the universe. Communism lies to you. It tells you this and tells you that, but it never fulfills what it promises.
It oppresses you.
Nevertheless, the children of Fidel Castro are millionaires. His grandchildren are millionaires. And what about the people? The people are oppressed. The army is over the people. They beat you and finish you off. They destroy you mentally.
They don't respect human rights. It is a hard dictatorship.
He spoke about how many women are violated by Cuban authorities. He says they would take a woman and do whatever they wanted with her. He says nothing could be done to stop it. If you tried, you would be killed.
What could I do? What could I do? This is happening now and will keep happening. The only thing the people can do is get out. They will kill you. They will kill you. How many times have they beaten me? All this has been done to me by the police, the state security, because I went against them. I can't let my son continue to see this. I had to leave. They were going to kill me. I know because it happened to companions of mine. They beat them to death and said it was because of a heart attack. The government of Cuba is capable of anything.
Apprehensions of Cuban migrants along Florida coasts are the highest there have been in years. And they aren't the only group of people fleeing Marxist dictatorships in record numbers. In May, nearly 7,500 Venezuelans were encountered by Border Patrol agents. That's the highest in all 14 years that records have existed. These Cuban asylum seekers are heading to Florida, Texas, and Washington in hope of finding the freedom they long for. Grace Coulter, NTD News.
In Washington, D.C. today, right outside the Capitol, a group of activists protested against Beijing hosting the 2022 Winter Olympics. They tell NTD that allowing Beijing to host the Games only emboldens the regime to continue with their human rights atrocities. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has more from the protest in D.C.
A number of ethnic and religious groups gathered in front of the Capitol Tuesday to express why they believe Communist China does not deserve to host the 2022 Olympics.
China is the only country that has hosted 2 Olympics back-to-back. They hosted the 2008 Olympics in Beijing, and now all of a sudden in 2022, they're hosting again. No one else has ever done that. So not only should they not be hosting, they should be banned, and they should be declared a transnational criminal organization, and we should be breaking off all diplomatic and economic ties with them.
Ethnic groups like Tibetans and Mongolians have had their spiritually rich cultures devastated by the Chinese regime. Other ethnic and religious groups like Uyghurs, Christians, and Falun Gong practitioners face jail time, torture, or even live organ harvesting if they don't renounce their faith. This Uyghur woman has family members in China who've been jailed and tortured for years. She tells NTD she regularly receives blackmail phone calls from CCP members, threatening her that they will continue to abuse her mother, sister, and uncle if she doesn't stop speaking out against the party's mass genocide.
And one of the speakers is giving a warning to big corporations and name brands who are going along with the Olympics in Beijing, what they're calling the genocide games, because he says eventually they'll be ruining their brands by going along with this. He says that Olympics were founded based on brotherhood of man, which is completely contrary to the evil nature of the Chinese Communist Party.
Oh, well, the nature of it is pure evil. I would say the nature of it is something that is totally ungodly. They have tried to make a god of themselves. And look inside yourself and see what you really think, not what the political correctness thinks, things like that, but also find people who have been through persecution, who have been through torture, read about what's really happening.
An organizer of these protests says this is about people standing with upright principles and morals.
Although people may not see anything in the short term, but the long term is that these types of activities have also gained the support of folks on both sides.
Senator Mitt Romney has just called for a U.S. diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympics. The European Union just passed a resolution calling for such a boycott. Now Romney and these protesters hope Congress will follow their example and do the same. Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
And the U.S. government says you might want to think twice before doing business in China's Xinjiang region because you might violate U.S. law. Over 1 million ethnic Uyghurs are being tortured and jailed there simply for being Uyghur. NTD's Phil Zhou reports.
Companies that continue doing business in Xinjiang, China could be breaking U.S. law because of the human rights abuses by the Chinese Communist Party. That's according to an updated warning from the U.S. government, including Homeland Security and the Department of Labor. Zubaira Shamsuddin knows this all too well as she's been fighting for Uyghur human rights and political freedom since the 1980s.
The U.S. businesses who are still doing business in East Turkestan, Xinjiang, they should stop. Because otherwise they will be complicit of China's government's genocidal policy.
She says the Chinese Communist Party targets everyone, including Uyghur businessmen, intellectuals, even regular people simply because they are Uyghurs, an ethnic and religious community.
The millions of people are still detained in the concentration camps, and in the condition of the concentration camps are just horrific.
The Labor Department says the Chinese regime's crimes against humanity include torture, rape, forced sterilization, restricting freedom of religion and freedom of movement.
They definitely killing those people mentally, physically, and emotionally. So that all this had to stop.
Just last week, President Biden blacklisted 14 Chinese companies for alleged human rights abuses and surveillance in Xinjiang, China, adding to the list of companies originally banned during the Trump administration. Phil Zhou, NTD News.
A professional basketball player is using a recent game to speak up for Uyghurs held in China's internment camps. Prominent Uyghur activists are praising him for it. NTD's Ellison Lee has that story.
Royce White once played for the Houston Rockets, but he made a name for himself because he did what the NBA didn't do, speaking up for victims of Communist China's human rights abuses. This is what he told CBS in an interview following a Big 3 game last Saturday.
Free the Uyghurs, 2 million ethnic minorities in East Turkestan, China, in concentration camps, something we got to talk about. You know I'm always going to talk about the real things.
The Chinese regime has held an estimated 1 million Uyghur Muslims and other ethnic minorities in China's Xinjiang region. White hoped to use the game as a platform to highlight the issue. He wrote on Twitter the next day, "When you know a moment like this should be going viral, but instead you get crickets from media outlets, that's when you know you're doing it the right way." The basketball player has also changed his Twitter profile photo to the Free the Uyghurs sign and pinned the post. His current league, the Big Three, also shared a picture of his interview. The World Uyghur Congress is praising him and contrasting White's actions with what the NBA did. They wrote, "Last year, the NBA apologized when its general manager, Daryl Morey, voiced support for protests in Hong Kong. Thank you. We need more athletes like Royce White." Back in 2019, the NBA apologized to China for making what they called inappropriate remarks. That's after the general manager of Houston Rockets tweeted a photo that says, "Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong." The NBA has since faced intense backlash for their stance on China. Allison Lee, NTD News.
The Federal Communications Commission voted unanimously today on a $1.9 billion program to reimburse American telecommunications companies for removing Chinese equipment. Last year, Chinese companies like Huawei and ZTE were deemed national security threats. The government ordered American companies to remove their equipment from American telecommunications infrastructure. The acting FCC chairwoman said the equipment could be manipulated, disrupted, or controlled by foreign actors. She said the quest to root out all such equipment is a daunting task for the FCC. Its newest order expands the companies eligible for reimbursement from those with 2 million or fewer customers to those with 10 million or fewer customers. The FCC also bars equipment from Chinese companies Hytera, Hikvision, and Dahua. Reporting your family to the authorities has a bad ring to it, especially to people who know a little history about communism. The FBI got a lot of backlash for a report of theirs, asking people to tell on their families if they see signs of violent extremism. NTD's Miguel Moreno has that story.
The report's been around for years. Homegrown violent extremist mobilization indicators. The FBI revived the 32-page report with a post that put off some users and lawmakers. Family members and peers are often best positioned to witness signs of mobilization to violence, learn to spot suspicious behaviors, and report them to the FBI. Trump-era National Intelligence Acting Director Richard Grenell replied, "This is outrageous. The FBI has a growing credibility problem, and this type of sinister snitching is clearly unhelpful." Republican Senator Ted Cruz, in both Cuba and China, they also asked children to spy on their parents. Inside, the report says it was created in response to a heightened threat from homegrown violent extremists going back to 2015. It lists 46 indicators that, if seen in combination in someone, that person could be a violent extremist. Like Indicator 2, seeking religious or political justification for a planned violent attack. Or Indicator 10, inquiring about jobs that give sensitive access in a suspicious manner. We contacted the FBI for comment, but we haven't heard back. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
First Lady Jill Biden is heading to Tokyo. She will lead the U.S. delegation to the Olympic Games opening ceremony. But President Biden will skip the trip because of the CCP virus lockdown in Japan. The trip will be Jill Biden's second foreign trip as First Lady. It's also her second time leading the U.S. delegation for the Olympic Games. Her first time was in 2010 when she was Second Lady. In Tokyo, she's expected to attend some sporting events as well. The opening ceremony will be held on next Friday, July 23rd. The 2020 Olympics were postponed from last year because of the pandemic, and this year fans are not allowed to attend because of the rising infection cases and state of emergency in Tokyo. And wildfires are raging across the western part of America. Lines of flames can be seen along the sides of a highway in Arizona, while hundreds of residents in Oregon were forced to evacuate on Monday from the rampaging bootleg fire.
Wildfires are tearing across parts of the U.S. In northeast Arizona on Monday, flames rampaged through forestation on the sides of a highway, with emergency vehicles battling the lines of fire. And in south central Oregon, hundreds of residents in the Klamath Falls area were forced to evacuate from the raging bootleg fire.
The sheriff pulled up, sparks and the embers are coming down. He says, "You better get the help. If you don't leave, you're dead."
We're sitting there watching the smoke. We've seen the flames coming. We don't know how far the flames were, but it was, you know, you could see him. I mean, it was hungry. It was mean. It was ugly. It's enough to make you cry. It's enough to make you sick to your stomach, because you don't know if you're going to be the one that loses your house, or you sit there and you watch your neighbor lose their house, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Gives you a different outlook on life. Gives you a different outlook on compassion.
Experts say the wildfires are fueled by a combination of record-high temperatures and a drought in the western part of the U.S.
Without really anything to stand in its way, it's just been rampaging with big high winds and really high temperatures, and it's just been moving and moving and moving.
Kuntz says major wildfire events like these ones used to happen once every 5 or 10 years, but now they've become chronic events.
And up next, 4 major U.S. pharmacy operators have struck a deal with 2 New York counties. They've agreed to pay millions to settle lawsuits claiming they fueled the opioid crisis. And are the police in New York City not handling private property as they should? One report says so, but not everyone agrees. That and more in just a moment. This morning, 2 police officers were shot and seriously wounded in Baltimore, Maryland. Luckily, doctors expect both of them will survive, but the suspect has died. Here are the details.
2 Baltimore officers were shot while looking for 32-year-old Jason Powell, who is wanted for a homicide that happened on June 19th. On the morning of July 13th, the officers spotted Powell's vehicle at Security Square Mall. As they were approaching the vehicle, the suspect opened fire and the officers shot back. Powell was taken to the hospital, where he later died. The officers, who were part of a task force, were taken to the University of Maryland Medical Center's shock trauma unit.
We have visited with those officers and their families in person, and we are relieved to say that at this time the 2 officers are in stable condition.
The police commissioner commended the officers for their bravery, courage, and professionalism, and said incidents like these are the most dangerous situations imaginable. Maryland State Police is offering full support for the investigation. This comes as violent crime rates have been surging nationwide. According to the Baltimore Sun, there have been 182 reported cases of homicide in the city this year. And Harrison said the Baltimore Police Department is facing a staffing shortage of about 230 officers. Mayor Brandon Scott said that building a safer Baltimore requires holding violent offenders accountable.
That we will not allow folks to think that they're going to get away with harming people on the streets of Baltimore.
On Monday, Maryland's lawmakers met to discuss ways to reduce violent crime. Their congressional delegation met with Baltimore's local officials. Senator Chris Van Hollen posted a tweet saying we must end the carnage. Senator Ben Cardin said there aren't simple solutions, but gun violence has plagued Baltimore for too long. He says Maryland is committed to making sure its residents and visitors are safe.
The opioid crisis has sparked thousands of lawsuits, and one of the major ones has just reached its first settlement. 4 major U.S. pharmacy operators have agreed to pay millions of dollars to settle claims that they fueled the epidemic. NTD's Grace Coulter has a story.
The operators of Walgreens, CVS, Rite Aid, and Walmart pharmacies reached a settlement with 2 New York counties claiming they fueled the opioid addiction epidemic. The companies agreed to pay a combined $26 million. County representatives said the funds will be used for mental health and addiction programs. But even though the pharmacies agreed to the payout, they did not admit wrongdoing. The plaintiffs accused pharmacies of ignoring red flags that opioids were being diverted to illegal channels. But the defendants denied these allegations. The CVS spokesperson said pharmacies aren't the ones who make or market opioids, nor do they write prescriptions for them. According to the CDC, from 1999 to 2019, nearly 500,000 people died from opioid overdoses in the U.S. As a result, over 3,000 lawsuits have been filed against drug makers, distributors, and pharmacies. The settlement was reached last month before the pharmacies were set to go to trial, but the agreements have just been publicly disclosed. Suffolk County legislators approved the deals on Monday, while Nassau County's legislature is expected to vote on final approval next month.
The remaining defendants of the New York counties and states lawsuit, a group of drug makers and distributors, are now on trial. We will keep you updated as things develop. A new report from the New York City Comptroller highlights the handling of private property by the police in the Big Apple. NTD's Ariane Pastar has the story.
Phone, wallet and keys, 3 items no one wants to lose. But let's say you do misplace or forget them somewhere. You'd probably want them to be turned into the police because you assume that there they'd be kept safe until you pick them up. Well, according to one report, the police in New York City are actually having problems documenting these items. New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer released a report accusing the NYPD of poorly documenting personal items. That could be lost property, evidence, contraband and more. Stringer's report finds that in police reports, invoice numbers were missing, description fields were left blank, and revenue amounts showed discrepancies. His office didn't disclose how many items were in fact lost.
People do get their property back. It is tracked. It's actually, you can't get away with losing. Everything is tracked.
He added that there is a simple reason for these accusations coming from the city comptroller at this time.
Because he's running for a position in office that's higher than what it is. And he's coming out in the nick of time, in the heart of campaign season, to make it seem like he's doing something.
The NYPD uses a special computer system to document and track all of those items. Now, Stringer says that system is at fault for all the wrongful documentation. He calls on the NYPD to update the system and make all necessary changes. Now, in a statement to NTD, the NYPD has agreed on updating the system and making those changes, but they added that they are confident that all seized items are handled appropriately. Arian Pastar, NTD News, New York.
And another flaw in a Boeing airline, this time in its 787 Dreamliner. Now the company says it will have to cut production. Here are the details. Boeing has discovered another flaw in its 787 Dreamliner. The Federal Aviation Administration says the company found wrinkling in what is called the forward pressure bulkhead in the jet's nose. That's an essential component that maintains the pressure in the cabin of the aircraft. But a spokesman for the FAA says it's not considered a direct threat for flight safety. And Boeing is still committed to fixing the issues. The company says it will reassign production line staff to inspect planes and make repairs. It also said it would reduce its production rate, but didn't say by how much. But that's despite warnings from Boeing's former chief financial officer. He says the lowering output could erode margins and force the program to carry the loss forward. Boeing already halted deliveries twice in less than a year by May. Now it says it will deliver fewer than half of the 100 Dreamliners still in its inventory. And that's while it's still trying to recover from the pandemic and the 2 crashes that grounded its best-selling 737 MAX. And since most of the price is only paid when the customer receives the plane, the delivery delays mean more financial strain for the company. Evelyn Lee, NTD News. And up next, Larry Elder has announced he is running for governor in California's recall election. Governor Newsom will not be listed as a Democrat on the ballot after a judge denied his lawsuit. And home prices are getting expensive in California. The median price for Bay Area homes has surpassed $1 million due to high demand and low inventory. More on that when we return.
The wait is finally over. Shen Yun returns to the stage with an all-new production filled with beauty, majesty, and a powerful message of hope. Discover the lost culture of ancient China. Discover this season, Shen Yun 2021.
Coming to the Palace Theater, July 24th and 25th. Tickets at shenyun.com/Stanford 888-90-SHOWS.
Hello, I'm Mike Lindell, inventor of MyPillow. Thanks to your support, you've helped make MyPillow become one of the fastest growing companies in America. Over the last 12 years, you've helped MyPillow create thousands of jobs right here in the USA.
When I got MyPillow, I'm asleep almost immediately. I stay asleep at night and I wake up more well-rested in the morning.
That's why I invented MyPillow. My patented fill adjusts to your exact individual needs and helps keep your neck supported and aligned. I'm interrupting this commercial right now. Retailers have canceled MyPillow, and to thank you for your support, I'm going to pass the savings directly on to you. For example, you get my 6-piece towel sets, regular $109.99, now only $44.98, or MyPillow dog beds for as low as $19.99 with your promo code.
For the best night's sleep in the whole wide world, visit MyPillow.com.
With Shepherd Lock, you can unlock your door by touching the deadbolt. Shepherd also boosts your home's security by proactively freezing in place if anyone ever tries to tamper with your lock or break down your door. We also make it easy to manage keys without hiding them under the mat. Easily create temporary keys for house guests, neighbors, or anyone else. Installation takes less than 5 minutes. Visit shepherdlock.com to buy your Shepherd Lock today, and for a limited time, enjoy 10% off.
Larry Elder has announced he's running for governor in California's recall election. Governor Newsom will not be listed as a Democrat on the ballot after a judge denied his lawsuit.
Radio host Larry Elder announced on Monday night that he will run for California's recall election of Governor Gavin Newsom. Elder held a celebration in Los Angeles on Tuesday. Critics have derided Newsom for his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic and other issues.
He's imposed mandates without paying attention to the science that they claim that they care about. He has ignored the very mandates he imposed on everybody else. His own children remained in in-person private education. He exempted his own business from the mandates, and our schools have deteriorated in quality.
The 69-year-old is an author and host of his daily radio program, The Larry Elder Show. In a statement on his campaign website, he wrote, "I'm running for governor because the decline of California isn't the fault of its people. Our government is what's ruining the Golden State." Elder says it does not matter that Newsom will not appear as a Democrat on the ballot for his recall election.
The problem is him, not his party affiliation. And I'm not running against Democrats. I'm running against Gavin Newsom. The guy has got to go. He's got to go. He's been arrogant. Crime has gone up. Homelessness has gone up.
Other candidates who have announced their run for governor include former San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer, California State Assembly member Kevin Kiley, and former gubernatorial candidate John Cox. The recall election has been officially set for September 14th. Eileen Eng, NTD News, California.
A California judge rules against Governor Gavin Newsom in a lawsuit. His party affiliation will not show on California's coming recall ballot. NTD's Cynthia Tsai with more on the ruling and candidates running to replace him.
A judge in Sacramento denied Governor Gavin Newsom's petition to include his party affiliation on the September recall election ballot. On Monday, Judge James Arguelles issued a court order. Arguelles ruled that Governor Newsom does not advance any constitutional claims in his petition and complaint. In June, Newsom filed the lawsuit against his Secretary of State, Shirley Weber. Weber refused to add Newsom's affiliation to the ballot after the submission deadline. According to the lawsuit, Newsom mistakenly failed to indicate his party preference, Democratic Party, on his recall paperwork in February last year. Newsom's counsel realized the error in June this year, but according to the new ruling, it was too late. Now, the September ballot will not include Newsom's political party preference. As the recall election draws closer, more candidates are joining the race. Assemblyman Kevin Kiley is one of the newest candidates.
I think the most important job of our next governor is to make it less important who the governor is by returning powers to local communities and individual citizens.
He believes Newsom has failed in listening to Californian constituents.
This is the moment to rekindle that great American innovation.
The recall election is set for September 14th. Cynthia Kai, NTD News, California.
San Francisco's Midyear crime report came out this week. The mayor and police chief provided updates, but several residents share their thoughts. Here's NTD's David Lam.
San Francisco's police chief and the mayor gave updates on San Francisco's crime report, noting that robberies steadily declined each year since 2018.
People are less likely to rob people when they see officers nearby.
The chief said that the presence of police officers are beneficial for robbery cases. Gun violence doubled since last year. In the last 2 years, burglaries are at their highest since 2015. Car theft slightly increased, but sexual assault cases dropped to 88 for the year.
What is not getting the attention is the fact that when you come to San Francisco and commit a crime, you will be arrested by the police department.
Tony Hall, a former San Francisco supervisor, says these figures may not paint the right picture. The report includes the period when the city was on lockdown and less people on the streets. He also believes the mayor's social programs are questionable and not working.
Which were initiated by defunding the police $120 million, putting them into various programs, but yet the stats show an increase in crime. So her programs aren't working. Defunding the police, resulting in a 25% decrease in police on the street, is not working.
Hall says that at the current state of a shortage of officers, crime would increase in all categories as more people return outside. A former police officer from the city says over 70 officers recently left the department, and there are a low number of recruits.
They have 19 people, I think, in the current academy class. I don't know how many are going to finish because some get weeded out. But I mean, that's not enough to replenish the amount of police officers leaving. It's a hostile environment toward police right here.
While criminals are being arrested, Barberini says they are not being prosecuted by the DA and are allowed back on the streets. David Lamb, NTD News, California.
California's home prices are on the rise, even with people moving out of the state. There is still high demand and low inventory. Here's NTD's Eileen Ang with more.
As of May this year, the median price for a single-family home in the Bay Area is about $1.3 million. This time last year, it was $965,000.
In Santa Clara County, we saw an increase in the median price over the past year go up 22.7%, and in the Bay Area, 38.9%.
The median price for a single-family home in Santa Clara County is almost $1.7 million, compared to last year's $1.34 million. Behind me is a $1.6 million home. It has 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and about 1,300 square feet. It was built in 1957. The Bay Area has always been a hot market for real estate, but a reason for the greater jump in prices is due to the quarantine and lockdown last year.
We saw very strong demand for homes available in the secondary home market. So some of the outlying areas that are more secondary home markets, those really caught fire. And when people were able to work remotely, didn't have to stay here, in Silicon Valley, they could go up to the mountains or Lake Tahoe or, another area and work remotely. So we did see prices in those areas really skyrocket.
As people spend more time working or learning from home, people are also looking for more spacious houses. This has led to a shortage and an increase in prices. In an online real estate panel discussion, experts talked about other factors driving up the market.
The housing shortage is, in California, that's systemic. That's something that's been building for decades. This isn't something suddenly new. It's just that during the pandemic, the demand combined with a lot ultra low interest rates leading to a lot of available capital from investment funds and others to throw into real estate, into residential real estate.
They mentioned converting some office spaces into residential areas.
The city is looking at, for instance, expanding the adaptive reuse ordinance into other nearby parts of downtown, like the Arts District and the Fashion District in LA. And part of what they're pushing for is more adaptive reuse in those areas of like low-rise industrial buildings and things like this.
Goss foresees housing prices continuing to increase and a strong demand for homes over the next year. Eileen Ang, NTD News, California.
Up next, Hong Kong's democracy under more threat from the Chinese regime. Local district councilors are being forced to pledge allegiance to the local pro-Beijing government, or else they will be unseated. Many are now resigning. Japan's annual defense ministry report is seeing tension surrounding Taiwan as a crisis. This as Beijing intensifies military presence in the region. That and more on NTD News. Hong Kong's democracy continues to crumble under pressure from Beijing. The city's district councilors are now being forced to pledge allegiance to the local government controlled by Beijing, or else they will be unseated. Many are saying they can't take it anymore. Here's NTD's Penny Zhou.
Some 200 Hong Kong district councilors are quitting their jobs. That's because they support the city's pro-democracy movement. Yet they are required to swear oath of allegiance to the city's government, which many see as a puppet controlled by Beijing's Communist Party. Hong Kong media report that district councillors are forced into taking the oath, or else they get disqualified, kicked off the council, and made to give back their wages.
The threats that the government is posing on the district councillors is actually that they will chase back your money and you can go bankrupt because of that, because you have spent all those money on the community. That is a risk that people don't want to take.
The pro-democracy camp won a landslide victory in the city's 2019 election and secured over 80% of the nearly 500 seats. These councillors take care of city-level issues.
It is clearly shown that Hong Kong people are in support for the pro-democracy camp. That is no doubt.
Some say the mass resignation could cripple the district council's operation. Questioned about that possibility, the city's chief executive responded,
That factor is not to be considered by us because we have to implement the law. Should there be any outcome, any consequences, we will deal with them.
The resignations may also result in the pro-Beijing camp taking back control of the council. Earlier this year, Beijing revised Hong Kong's election system and now mandates that only those considered patriots by the Chinese regime's definition can rule Hong Kong.
After the national security law is passed, everybody knows the risk of being in politics is much higher, that you may be subjected to arrest and prosecution that you have never imagined before.
Penny Zhou, NTD News.
President Biden is set to warn U.S. businesses that it may no longer be safe to operate in the city of Hong Kong. NTD's Tiffany Meyer reports.
President Biden is planning to send a message to U.S. companies in Hong Kong that it may no longer be safe to do business there. The Financial Times reported the details, citing government sources. The Communist Party recently passed a new law giving itself the right to impose sanctions on any person or entity who complies with foreign sanctions against China. At the same time, foreign companies in Hong Kong could have their assets taken or face other penalties by the regime. The report says if Biden moves ahead with the message, it will be the first time the U.S. has issued a business advisory about Hong Kong. American firms have a heavy presence in the city. It hosts the regional headquarters of over 280 American businesses and is home to more than 1,000 members of the American Chamber of Commerce. The White House is also considering allowing Hong Kong citizens to stay in the U.S. after their visas expire. That's if they'll face political persecution if they go back. Tensions surrounding Taiwan have reached crisis levels. This says Japan's annual Defense Ministry report. They released it on Tuesday amid Beijing's intensifying military presence in the region. Japan is becoming more worried about Taiwan's security implications in regards to its own safety. Japan's Deputy Prime Minister previously said that if Taiwan falls into the hands of the CCP, Japan's southern islands could be next. The report says stabilizing the Taiwan situation is important for Japan's national security. It adds Japan needs to pay close attention with a sense of crisis more than ever before. The defense report also warns that China's increased military presence have become a matter of grave concern to the region, including Japan. A top Japanese official pointed out that Chinese vessels have been stationed very close to Japan's territorial waters for nearly 5 months now. He called it an extremely grave situation. On Tuesday, the Chinese Foreign Ministry rejected Japan's concerns. They say that China's military activities are normal and that Japan is exaggerating what they call the Chinese threat.
Coming up, unrest continues in South Africa after the arrest of the country's former president. Now the army has been called in to contain the chaos. And the French government will make vaccines mandatory for healthcare workers. The measure might even be extended to all French. That and more here on NTD News.
Hi folks, Joe Namath here, and if you're on Medicare, this is important. You're now entitled to eliminate co-pays and get dental care, dentures, eyeglasses, prescription coverage, in-home aids, unlimited transportation, and home-delivered meals, all at no additional cost. Plus, your zip code may have coverage with the Give Back benefit that adds money back to your Social Security check every month.
I called to get dental, transportation, meals, and the gift bag benefit.
With this virus situation, I called to get everything I'm entitled to. I couldn't believe I was missing out on so many benefits.
With the uncertainty of the virus, you need to get everything you're entitled to. Millions of people have trusted the Medicare coverage helpline. You can too. Call now. It's free.
Call 1-800-764-1930. That's 1-800-764-1930 now.
South Africa has deployed its army to contain the unrest that broke out following the arrest of the country's former president. 72 people have died and over 500 have been arrested. The police and military are using stun grenades and rubber bullets to quell the riots. Here's NTD's Kevin Hogan with more.
Hundreds of South Africans looted supermarkets and shops in Durban City, South Africa on Tuesday. That's while police made arrests and the military patrolled ransacked areas in Johannesburg. The police minister says the protests will be curbed.
The current situation on the ground is under strong surveillance, and we will ensure that it does not deteriorate any further.
The country's worst unrest in years was triggered by the arrest of former President Jacob Zuma, who was against apartheid. Apartheid, or apartness in the language of Africans, was a form of institutionalized racial segregation against the country's non-white population. And while Zuma's arrest in connection with alleged money laundering and fraud was the trigger, the chaos has evolved into an outburst of anger over persistent poverty and inequality.
We cannot allow anyone to make a mockery of our democratic state, and we have instructed the law enforcement agencies to double their efforts to stop the violence and to increase deployment on the ground.
After days of disorder, concerns are growing over food and fuel supplies. That's because the looting and unrest have stopped exports, damaged crops, and closed stores. Long lines formed at supermarkets and lines of cars wrapped around the block waiting to gas up. A resident says he had to drive for 6 hours to fill up because all the fuel stations in his community were damaged.
The people starting fire, the shops, everything, that's why the queue for petrol is like this, because it's supposed to put the petrol pint on Chatsworth, but I can't because now there's fire everywhere.
What's more, residents wielding guns blocked off streets as looters ransacked shops in Durban, and armed locals chased after looters in supermarkets. The leader at the focal point of the unrest, Zuma, was sentenced in June to 15 months in prison for refusing to give evidence about potential corruption during his 9 years in office. He pleaded not guilty to the separate fraud charges in May. Kevin Hogan, NTD News.
And France is now mandating virus vaccines for healthcare workers, but some say this is the mark of an authoritative government and fear it will be extended to all French. NTD correspondent David Vives brings us the details.
On Monday, French President Emmanuel Macron announced that CCP virus vaccines will be mandatory for all healthcare workers. According to Macron's order, workers have until September 15th to get the shot. Unvaccinated workers will face sanctions, like fines or having their pay suspended. The announcement was met with mixed reaction throughout the country, especially among healthcare workers.
I don't understand why they want to force us to get vaccinated, knowing we have rights in France. We are in a supposedly free country.
According to journalist and author Jean Robin, the move is reminiscent of an authoritative government.
People in the healthcare system will have to be vaccinated, otherwise they won't be paid. This is how it works in communist China, and this is how it works in France now.
In China, different reports show the vaccine was forced on people, either directly or indirectly. For example, in the coastal city Hainan, the municipal government began blacklisting residents who refused to be vaccinated. In his book, France, a Colony of Communist China, Robin explores similarities between the French government and the Chinese Communist Party. He says the mandatory measure is about forcing the people, and it discriminates against people who are not vaccinated. Robin says this is just like how the CCP manages the Chinese people.
The principles remain the same, which is to control people, to make them do what you want, like for vaccination. All the people who don't want to be vaccinated won't be able to go to restaurants, won't be able to go to theaters, won't be able to go anywhere. So it's really a mandatory system even though they say it's not. Just like Communist China say, it's not mandatory, it's just for improving the life of everybody.
The vaccine mandate may extend to all of France, as Macron's goal is 100% vaccination for the country. And more governments are considering the hard line with the vaccine, particularly in Europe. The UK will mandate vaccines this October for healthcare staff, while Italy and Greece have already made the move. David Dives, NTD News, Paris.
Madrid is hoping an historic urban park and surrounding cultural area will be awarded World Heritage status by UNESCO. The Buen Retiro Park and the Paseo del Prado have been central to city life since the 16th and 17th centuries. NTD's Joy Duguid brings us this story.
An idyllic day in the Buen Retiro Park Lake. This place is a green haven for residents of Madrid, right in the centre of the Spanish capital, and it could soon get international recognition. It's been nominated for inclusion in UNESCO's prestigious World Heritage List. Madrid City Council believes the 16th and 17th century site is unique in its era and meets UNESCO's criterion of outstanding universal value. The area includes an abundance of institutions such as the Cibeles Palace, the current seat of Madrid City Council, the Bank of Spain or Casa de America building. It also boasts a number of famous monuments, such as the Puerta de Alcalá Gate and the Cibeles and Neptuno fountains. The Buen Retiro Park and El Prado Promenade in Madrid has evolved from the former royal site since the 17th century.
Paseo del Prado is the first tree-lined urban promenade recorded in the history of Western urban planning. It's a landscape model which was exported to America.
Citizens began to use El Prado Promenade in the 15th century as a place of recreation. Carriages and all social classes used to meet here for walking. In modern times, the transport may have changed, but the enjoyment of the space remains.
Madrid should win because its nomination presents the biggest green zone in the center of a city in all of Europe. In Europe, there is no park like the 120 hectares of Buen Retiro and an 8-hectare research garden like the Royal Botanical Garden.
The decision on whether it gets World Heritage status will be made at the World Heritage Committee's 44th session from the 16th to the 31st of July. Joy Duguid, NTD News.
3 Egyptian friends have invented a vehicle that can drive on water, and it's now available for sale. The team hopes to further develop it so it can also operate on land. Let's take a look.
This vehicle looks like a car, but it's actually a boat. 3 Egyptian friends manufactured it mostly using local material and local talent. The co-inventor says at first he wanted to manufacture it abroad, but then he changed his mind.
We found really good resources in Egypt and manufactured it, as you can see, and thank God the product is all Egyptian. It was made by Egyptians with Egyptian materials. Only the engine is Japanese.
So far, the friends have produced 12 of these vehicles, and they've received many more orders. Karim Amin is confident they can further expand the business.
The first place I launched the vehicle was Marsa Matur, and then came to the northern coast to expand, and God willing we will expand to the Red Sea and outside Egypt.
Each vehicle takes 3 weeks to produce. They cost between $19,000 and $45,000, and they are still working on further developing the product.
We also started working on making this vehicle usable over land, so the idea is complete.
As well as plans to make a model that can operate on land, they also aim to export to overseas markets. Colin Fredrickson, NTD News.
And rug weaving in Uzbekistan is becoming increasingly popular. And to help boost the industry, the government is even letting rug weavers off the hook for income tax. NTD's Andrew Thomas reports.
The dying Aral Sea is the site of a man-made ecological disaster, and it's attracting an increasing number of visitors each year. Once an important seaport, Munak is now home to just a few thousand residents. People left the area when the sea started to disappear, leading to an economic downfall. But the boost of tourism gives locals a chance to develop small businesses, like factories producing souvenirs. Rug making is one of them.
In the past, I was weaving rugs only for my own pleasure, but now, since the development of the tourism industry in Munyak, the rug weaving industry started to develop.
A rug factory opened in Munak in 2020, and it employs 50 women. The company specializes in crafting embroidered items. Uzbek needlework is considered a relatively young art. It isn't as famous as its neighbor in Turkmenistan. Traditionally, Uzbek rugs are woven in a horizontal loom and have very distinctive decorations. In an effort to help the industry, the government has exempted craftsmen from paying income tax.
The local population is interested in weaving rugs. This interest has a very good impact on the region. Tourists want to buy rugs and natural fur produced locally.
The disappearance of the Aral Sea is considered one of the most vivid examples of humans' exploitation and mismanagement of water resources. Notably, the former Soviet Union conducted a water diversion program to turn the desert into cotton plantations. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
And that's it for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Evelyn Lee.
We have a new channel. Subscribe to us on YouTube at NTD News. Get the highlights of our news broadcast and the most important headlines that we curate especially for you.
Don't let YouTube decide what information you get. That's your choice. YouTube is deleting our videos and cuts you off from a source of honest reporting. Make sure you don't lose access to NTD's news content, and take a quick moment to subscribe to our newsletter so no matter what happens here, you'll keep your access to a trustworthy news source.